Hello, everyone. I'd like to welcome you to our Chartres community call. And it's wonderful to be together in this February time, just after Valentine's Day. And today, just as a little preview, our guest speaker or our featured speaker on the call is Jain, who lives in Australia and whose whole life is dedicated to the magic of numbers. And so we're really looking forward to what he has to say today. And Apila isn't with us yet, but we're hoping she will be any minute. But Ruth, would you like to sing just something brief to set the tone for our call?
Okay.
Thank you. So I'd like us to turn inward for a moment. I invite you to recollect moments in Chartres, in the cathedral, on this sacred hill, where such history lies with the Carnutes and the traditions that have empowered the land. And as we prepare to gather again in Chartres, we call upon the elements of the earth, the air, the sacred air, and the breeze that flows through this town and through the cathedral, that bears with it the light that shines from the heavens, that brings the light of the sun, and that brings the light of the stars in the night. And we give our thanks to the stones, a place where limestone and granite meet, where the feminine and the masculine within the earth unite and create a sacred energy. Beneath the town, beneath the cathedral, and beneath our feet as we gather in this sacred land. We offer our thanks for the water, the sacred river that flows through this village, and the preciousness of life, water that brings eternal life, that is the breath of hope for all living beings, for the plants, for the animals, and for humanity. And we give our thanks to the fire, the spirits of fire that live in warmth, that live in the stars and the sun, the fire that lives in our hearts when we come together in love, and how these four elements represent a foundation of the number 4, which is sacred to the earth and sacred to each of us. So we call on the Great Spirit, to God, to bless us on this call and carry our hearts and minds and souls aloft in the journey of arithmetica, and give thanks for the blessings of our existence and our community. Amen. So I mentioned earlier that Jain is going to be our featured speaker today, and Jim is going to have a few things to say, but as an opening, I wanted to just share a very short little story that has to do with numbers in a very different way than we've been talking about numbers. But it's a little story that gives hope in our times with all the challenges that we're meeting in the political arena in our country, in the United States, and those of you who are living in Europe. There's so much strife and uncertainty and challenge in every aspect. So this is a little story about a coal mouse and a wild dove. Tell me the weight of a snowflake, a coal mouse asked a wild dove. Nothing more than nothing, was the answer. In that case, I must tell you a marvelous story, the coal mouse said. I sat on the branch of a fir, close to its trunk, when it began to snow. Not heavily, not in a raging blizzard, no, just like in a dream, without a wound and without any violence. Since I did not have anything better to do, I counted the snowflakes settling on the twigs and needles of my branch. Their number was exactly 3,741,952. When the 3,741,953rd dropped onto the branch, nothing more than nothing, as you say, the branch broke. Having said that, the coal mouse flew away. The dove, since Noah's time and authority on the matter, thought about the story for a while and finally said to herself, perhaps there is only one person's voice lacking for peace to come to this world. So I share that hopeful note for all of us to make our voices heard. And Apila, I want to welcome you. And would you like to bless us?
Mighty Son Creator, Great Spirit, God, we call to you this morning. We visit now the ancient caves of France. In the darkness, we behold ancient mobile art, carvings on bones, tiny striations. We look today to binary codes and computers. In the swirling mists on the mountain, we see the patterns, the fractals. In our lives, in the cells of our being, the sound, the vibration of our words, everywhere, everywhere, through arithmetica, we hear the hint of your voice in our lives. The possibility, the reality of our own divinity. Let us be aware. Grant us the awareness of the light within, that we might perceive the divine unfolding of you and us in one, in cadence and rhythm with the heartbeat of our Mother Earth, for which we give thanks.
Thank you, Apila. And good morning to you.
Good morning.
These wee hours. So, Jim, I'd like to invite you to give us a little bit of an update and share whatever wisdom you would like to share before we invite Jain to speak.
Thank you, Karen. Hello, everyone. Thank you for that beautiful invocation, Apila. It's always so good to hear your voice. Sorry you had to get up so so early. We're still wrestling with the right kind of time. As a global university, we have people coming on these calls from all over the world. So we're continuing to struggle with how we manage it, because it's 6:30 a.m. for Apila and it's 4:30 a.m. for Jain. One in Hawaii, one in Australia, and so we'll continue to work the problem, as they say, and hopefully come up with a solution. What we have been doing is starting at 8 a.m. Pacific. That gets most of the world, but then we lose Australia
And Hawaii.
And Hawaii. So we'll continue to work it. Maybe we'll slip it to 10 o'clock. But we have other obligations as well. So anyway, we'll continue to work and bring you updated information. So I wanted to continue my remarks from last time in the spirit of Karen's story, because I think that little mouse carried deep wisdom for our contemporary situation. I think all of us are aware that the current president of the United States is unfit for the job, both in terms of professional experience and in terms of mental stability. I think we have someone in the White House now who's essentially deranged. And we all need to take that into account. I think we also are beginning to become aware on a larger and larger mass level the degree to which he and his entire staff were in collusion with the Russian government in the manipulation of the 2016 presidential election. And that is treason. And so we're not only talking about a man in the White House who does not have the professional or mental capacities to do the job. We're dealing with someone who engaged in high crimes and misdemeanors to get the job. And it's just worth taking a moment to explain what treason is. Treason has a number of forms, but the most common one is when a private individual colludes with a foreign government to destabilize that private citizen's own country. And they engage in illegal activity to, in some way, overthrow the government. Well, by tampering with the electoral processes of the United States, you're taking on the U.S. Constitution. So what Trump committed was a crime against the American people and a crime against the Constitution. And what he is now preparing to do, if he's not stopped, is to lift the sanctions against Russia and allow ExxonMobil, the former CEO of which is now the Secretary of State, to engage in the most massive oil exploration in the history of oil and in one of the biggest business deals in the history of economics, as ExxonMobil, which has 63.7 million acres of leased land in the Arctic, joins with Rosneft, the big Russian oil company, to engage in massive drilling of oil in the Arctic, thereby significantly damaging one of the most fragile ecosystems in the entire world. That is a crime against humanity, and it's a crime against the future. So this is where the little mouse story comes in. One single snowflake doesn't amount to more than nothing upon nothing. But when that 7,450,000, whatever that number was, that next snowflake landed on that branch, the branch broke. And I think I want to just accentuate that one point for this morning. And that is the most remarkable thing that's happened since the inauguration of Donald Trump on January 20th. Barely even a month ago, was an instantaneous ignition of just about everybody on the planet who cares. And here in the United States, we had the largest single-day protest in the history of the United States. It was the first time in American history where the protest was bigger than the inauguration. I was there, so I know, for both of them. It was one of the largest global manifestations in history, as people all over the world, some, I understood from one source, over 600 different actions in different parts of the world to stand up and say, we are not going to tolerate this man in the White House. As you all know, just a few days ago, Michael Flynn, his national security advisor and his key liaison with Russian intelligence, who was organizing the collusion between the Trump organization and the Russian intelligence as they were hacking Hillary Clinton's emails and the DNC and engaging in electoral fraud and manipulation of false media in the news cycles. He dropped like a rock. And I want to note this. It appears that the reason why he dropped so quickly was not because of public protest. It was because of the intelligence agencies themselves inside the US government. So when we think of these little snowflakes piling up against Donald Trump, it's not just those of us on the streets. There are people inside the Congress, there are people inside the courts, there are people inside the intelligence agencies. When I just came in from Washington, and the president of the European Union, a man by the name of Tusk, in a statement said that Donald Trump, president of the United States, was a threat to Europe. First time in the history of European American relations that the US has been designated a threat. And 2 weekends ago, the leaders of the EU met informally in Malta, in part, to decide what they need and have to do to counter this man. So I would urge all of us to be aware of what's happening. We're undergoing a coup in the United States. And we need to protect our republic. And we need to protect the world. So however you do this, every opportunity you have to take a stand about what's happening, remember the little story of the little mouse and the snowflake. And one of the things that we're beginning to organize, just so everybody can start preparing, on April 22nd, about 6 weeks from now, 2 months, about 8 weeks from now, is Earth Day. And on the 29th, a week later, is going to be the People's Climate March in Washington. And what we're doing is we're urging people all over the world, whether you're in Hawaii or Australia or North Carolina, wherever you are, to do some kind of action between Earth Day and the Climate March that celebrates the Earth, that brings awareness to the inflection point in which we now find ourselves. Because this is the moment we all feared would come. We've reached our Hitler moment. If we don't stop Donald Trump, he's going to destroy the world as we know it. First, by overriding the US Constitution, which is a particular matter to the United States. But if he engages in the kind of massive oil drilling that they have in mind in the Arctic, it's going to be a devastation beyond measure. So there is no neutral ground, my friends. No one's going to stay on the sidelines on this one. Everybody got to know, everybody has to know that what's happening is dangerous, it's real, and it's going to require every single snowflake to pile up on that branch. And if we do that with conscious awareness of what is at stake, the numbers will be on our side. So let us remember the story of the little field mouse as we take on the President of the United States. Thank you, Karen. Welcome, Jane.
Thank you.
Thank you, Jim. I'm just very grateful for you for just putting it right out there the way it is. Thank you. Okay, so we'd like to welcome Jain as our guest speaker, talking about 3 to 4 to 5 to 6. So welcome.
Thank you for having me. I'd like to start this journey with a few images before I go through a PowerPoint. I have about 30 images that I'd like to show you. And because I'm still working with the share screen, I thought I'll just go through the essential images that we're going to talk about. And then when I do my PowerPoint, we can just go straight through the information on 3, 4, 5, 6. The 6, as we know, is the hexagon, which is a snowflake. So that's quite relevant. Okay, I want to start off with a thing called cosmogenesis, which is the journey from the 1, the sphere, to 2 to 4 to 8. This is a doubling sequence binary code. So it works out that in our creation, our cosmogenesis, from the beginning of time, there was always the 1, which is the source, and then the 1 separated became 2. And when 2 separated, each cell mitotically divides, it becomes 4. So this is our zygote. Our zygote is the original cell of creation. And it works out that when the 2 became the 4, we became this tetrahedron or pyramid, which the Pythagoreans associated the element of fire. So there's a process that goes on infinitely called 1, 2, 4, 8, 16. It's a binary code doubling sequence. But before the 1 became the 2, something essential happened. The current myth is that the female egg is penetrated by a single sperm. So the current view of creation is that one male sperm penetrates the female ovum and life begins. But the sacred geometrical view is that there needs to be 12 sperms line around the female egg. If this is the female egg, the 12 line up in a very beautiful coordinates based on the dodecahedron. And then the 13th sperm, once the grid is set up, the 13th sperm penetrates and creates the life. So that's the view that I would like to start off with, because if we could visualize the 12 spheres around the central 13th, if you can visualize, we have an orange, and I asked you how many other spheres can pack around a central sphere, the answer would be 12. When you ask a lot of men this puzzle, how many spheres pack around the central sphere, they probably say 10, 15, but if you ask a woman, they intuitively always get it right and say 12. So I just want to show you what would happen if a magic spider was able to go inside these 12 spheres. If a magic spider connected the 12, not the 13th, a geometrical shape would emerge, and it would look like this shape here. This shape here is based on 4 hexagons. I'm going to hold an emblem of sickness. So I'm holding one hexagon, but there's also another one. So I could turn it around and say there's another hexagon. So there's actually 4 hexagons that make this shape. So even though there's 12 spheres, we're looking at the 12 vertices of the cube octahedron. another way to express the cube octahedron would be to show it like this shape here. So here's a circle. If I was to open the 4 rings, there's 4 copper rings. If I could spend a bit of time, I could slowly and correctly get the perfected shape of the 12 nodal points. So this is what we looked like before the 1 became the 2. So this is, there was a geneticist called Derald Langham who studied plant biology, and basically he spent his life studying the cells of the sexual cells of all creatures and plants. And then one day he switched his attention from the plants to the human zygote, and he realized that the one fundamental shape that surrounded all living cells, whether it's plant or human, was this. And it's interesting that this is the 12 around the 1. This is also the symbol for NASA. This is a symbol for space age. And if you were talking to a child, they would say, oh, that looks like an atomic structure. We often do, when we do a doodle of 4 circles, we say, oh, this is what an electronic orbit looks like. So this is the 12 around the 1, which kind of means when someone like Jesus has enough love, when someone emanates enough love, they naturally attract to themselves 12 disciples or 12 other spheres. Here's another view of the 12 around the 1. It's exactly this shape again, the shape that I showed here. I've done it with rods and rubber joins. And if I was to take this cube octahedron, the 12 around the 1, and compress it, if I do a half compression, I've created an icosahedron, which is 20 triangles. But if I do and that's the shape of a virus. So this is the living mathematics of nature. If I squeeze again, I end up with if I do another squeeze, I end up with the atomic structure of fluorite crystal. So we know this shape is called the octahedron, which has a lot to do with your diamond light body, which we use for protection. And you can keep compressing. And when we compress again, we get the pyramid. And if I squeeze one more time, the final time, I end up with the basic building block of all creation called the tetrahedron. So the reason I'm showing this is because we want to start. Karen gave an amazing lecture last month of how the 1 became the 2. So, and then the 2 became the 3. So here's the Trinity. So I want to look at the basic building block of all structure. So this tetrahedron is common with pollens and many other things in creation adopt this pyramidal shape. Okay, so that's still the 12 around the 1. And I have another I'll show you how we get this as well. This is the cube octahedron, the 12 around the 1. Here's a cube. I can open up the cube and shapeshift it with a few little toys, a few little magnetic turns, and just in a few little turns, I'm able to get the 12. 4 also contains all the keys of creation. We call it the cube of space. So I can open this again. So it opens up, and then it shapeshifts, and it becomes back to the cube. Okay, so what happens is when the 1 becomes the 2, becomes the 4, the first shape we adopted was a tetrahedron. And that's 4 triangles. That's when the 3 becomes the 4, when we became a shape. So the first memory we have is a tetrahedron, because the definition of sacred geometry is, who are we? It's the memory of who we are. So we're using this universal language of shape and pattern recognition to remember where we started from. So that's why I'm talking about the creation from 1 to 2 to 4. When the 4 cells divide, we become 8. So this is what we looked like when we were 8 cells. So I'm touching the 4 vertices of a tetrahedron. So that's this is an upward tetrahedron, but it's also being interpenetrated or interdigitated by a downward tetrahedron. So there's 2 pyramids going through each other with 8 points. And this is what Buddha in his enlightenment, he had a epiphany in his enlightenment, and he said nature is made up of 8-pointed things. He called it Akta Kalapas. Akta means 8. The cube has 8 points. And Kalapas is atom. So Buddha described the subatomic particle, saying it has to do with the number 8, which we believe is the cube. But most people know this as your your Merkaba vehicle. And when we talk about car, the Merkaba, we're actually talking about counter-rotating fields, which I'm coming up to. Okay, then we have when the 8 divided again became 16. We keep dividing 30, 32, 64. Double 64 is 128, 256. And double 256 is 512. So when we became 512 cells, this sacred geometry became like a blob of jelly, and we formed this torus shape. And the torus so we ended up with having 2 holes or 2 openings. One opening, here's one opening going outward, and the other one on the other side is going inward. So this is called implosion, which is called suction to the center. So this became your mouth. Like as a baby, you know that all the baby does is just takes in. If it keeps sucking titty all the time, you know that it's going to excrete. So this became the bum. So sacred geometry is saying that we started off as a torus, a toroidal domain with 2 holes, and out of this sacred geometry we evolved into the embryo. So the embryo looked like the phi spiral. So every part of our body, the ratio of our arms to our feet, nose to the chin, is all based on this 8:13 ratio, which is seen in many things like the pine cone. So when we look at the pine cone, that's the Mer. Mer means counter-rotating field. So you can see that there's 8 spirals going one way and 13 spirals going the other way. And we're going to talk about this in Chartres when we look at the golden spiral. So I believe that the pine cone or the pine code is the key to everything I know. Okay, so I've shown most of the shapes. So I'm going to move over to share the screen in a minute. So one other essential image that's coming up is called the ram's horn. So when I go through my slideshow talking about 3, 4, 5, 6, you'll see there's a reference to the ram's horn. And where does this come from? If we were to place a bead, this is the 12 around the 1. If I was to glue a bead on this point here, and someone could film the path of the bead as we compress to the center, the path of the bead as it collapses towards the center, as we go in to the center, it forms the ram's horn. And the ram's horn is the 3-dimensional version of the Fibonacci sequence, the sequence of squares, the diminishing squares. So this is a very important shape. But if I was to put 2 ram's horns together, here's one field going one way. This is what nature does. One spiral goes one way and the other spiral goes the other way. When they counter-rotate, it forms a torus. So the torus is what I'm calling a 4th-dimensional sphere. Okay, and the last image is, I'm going to go to screen share. I'm going to just show you one more moving image and then we'll go through the PowerPoint. I want to show you this image here. So this is the 4 in the 4. This is called Metatron's cube. This is the cube within the cube, means when the inside is the same as the outside, we access the path of an infinity or foreverness or timelessness. Some archangels like Michael, another one called Metatron, they adopt these symbols. This is the symbol for the Lord of Electron. So that would be an expression of creation. So the cube within the cube is also Thor's hammer, the double cube. Thor's hammer that gave him his power is based on this fractality. So fractal means when the inside is the same as the outside, it gives us the ability to turn ourselves inside out so that we can travel through time and space and still survive and retain our identity. So this is a very potent animation. So if I refer to Metatron's cube, you know that it's actually an animation. Another key word, what you're seeing, it's called fractal. Fractal doesn't mean fraction. That's the fractality means the ability to travel infinite from the macrocosm to the microcosm through the specific frequency of the divine proportion. That 8:13 ratio we saw in the pine cone is the key to how to access the higher dimensions. So I'm going to stop this one. I'm going to go back to my main PowerPoint, which is over here. Okay. Okay, so I'm just going to do a few, this is, this originally was a keynote. I lost my the keynote didn't open today, so I'm just showing you a slideshow of the PDF I made. So I'm just showing you flat images now. So I just wanted to introduce the talk with what we call a crystal child, the star child. The children being born today are absolutely switched on. They got more codons or DNA switched on than our generation. So we need to create a curriculum that actually feeds their soul. I call it the symmetry of the soul. And in this journey from 1 to 2 to 3 to 4 to 5 to 6, we will explore the definition of what fractal means when the inside is the same as the outside. So we saw this as an animation, and it's really learning how to become embedded, how we can not just rely on external geometries to protect us, but I believe this understanding of mathematics and geometry is to embed this knowledge into our heart, to further our auric hygiene, so that we're not dependent on tools and mandalas and external objects. We're learning how to access this light geometry that already exists within us. Somewhere along the journey, we forgot how to access this knowledge. So what you can see here is I work in Byron Bay. I'm started a school where I work with children of all ages. Star kids are 5 to 8 year olds. This girl here that you see built this icosahedron. It's got 20 triangles. As soon as she built this, she decided she would sit and meditate in it. So I just quickly took a photo. So I really like this picture because it shows that she's literally embedded, she's nested inside this geometry, and she got a little smile on her face. Her mother's in the background there. When I teach, parents are often with the children. Yes, so I believe there's a new breed of children being born, and they're not going to relate to conventional schools. Their souls and awakened memory of who they are need to be nourished, and it is our duty as concerned parents and guardians to create a new and exciting curriculum based on the 7 liberal arts of ancient times, the quadrivium that includes number and geometry of the living mathematics of nature, along with meditation and living diet. Most of us all know about the distinction between left and right brain, but basically left brain cortex accesses the art, and numbers are considered left brain when we look at analytics and science and reason. But we're more interested in the right brain because that's the visual, that's the hologram, that's all the beautiful color, and we get switched on. So when we turn numbers into pictures, we're absolutely reconnecting all our circuitry. I call that whole brain learning, and I think this is a great way for teaching children how to create sacred symbol from numbers, which we're just going to look at. I'm currently working with Joycelyn Tang in Singapore. She's my promoter in Asia, and we're creating a whole series of workbooks for Star Kids. So you can see this Singaporean girl drawing not just a pentacle, but if you look closely, there's a pentacle within the pentacle within the pentacle. It's a nesting of 5 ratios that can go forever and ever. But as we know, a lot of these sacred symbols got demonized, which means they put fear around it. And I believe our duty as educators is to become fearless warriors so that we can bring back this ancient knowledge. In fact, a lot of this stuff on the golden mean and platonic solids was being taught in our schools in Australia 100 years ago. I'm not sure about America and Europe, but definitely 100 years ago, the curriculum clearly stated that every child had to learn about the Fibonacci numbers, the pine cone, and the 5 platonic solids. But someone in authority decided to take all that information out. So what I'm presenting here is not even radical. It's basically a return back to Euclid's 13 books that he wrote called the Elements. So we're reigniting ancient knowledge. So here's a boy in Singapore looking at a magic square. This is one of the days we're going to do in July, talking about how to turn numbers of the magic squares into atomic structure. So this is a whole new curriculum, like a new Steinerism, based on the mathematical origin of sacred symbols. So when we see a love heart, we know that it's actually made from the golden spiral. This is a typical Facebook post. So every day I write, Rena, my manager for Facebook, she finds these images and I write a post about what does fractal mean, how do we embed sacred geometry. So I do a daily post, and that's created a dictionary of harmonics. So I have a 2,000-page dictionary of harmonics that can explain what's 3 about, what's number 4 about, what's 5. Okay, so that was just an introduction. And I just wanted to thank Karen for introducing the last talk from 1 to 2 to 3. So we're going to go deeper now into the nature of 3-ness, 4-ness, 5-ness, and 6-ness. So you can see that when we just have an equilateral triangle, which means that 3 triangles are the same, all the sides are the same. If we connected the 3 midpoints and drew the triangle inside, and we counted how many triangles do we now have, the 3 automatically subdivides into 4. And that's probably the best and the simplest expression how the 3 can access the knowledge of the 4. And an image on the right is that if we divided the triangle, the 3-ness, into 4 triangles on each side, so it's called a 4-frequency triangle, and counted up all the little triangles, you'll see that a 4-frequency triangle now has 16 little triangles, and 16 is a square number. So suddenly the triangles are also squared numbers. There's a relationship between the 3 and the 4. Okay, and this is another interesting thing where the 3 becomes the 4, is the shift from the triangle to the tetrahedron. Because when we say tetrahedron, which I showed you before, a tetrahedron automatically has 4 sides. So the flat triangle only is 3, but its next dimensional analog is the pyramid, which has 4 faces. So this is really simple. It's not even hard physics. And that's called fractal. When you look at tetrahedron, and Magic Spider went inside that tetrahedron, if Magic Spider could weave a golden thread and connect the 4 centers of the 4 triangles, it actually makes a copy of itself. So that means it's fractal. Fractal means that the inside is the same as the outside. So it made a self-similar copy, even though it's a miniature copy, but that process can repeat forever and ever. So that's called fractal. All the other platonic solids don't do that. Only tetrahedron, triangle, or tetra is fractal. Now this is an unusual little realization. I've been studying sacred geometry for 30 years, and only last year did I discover that there's actually a square inside the tetrahedron. So if you're working with students and I said to you, where can you find a square inside a tetrahedron? If you can see that pyramid, there's a pink square. That's actually showing you that the nature of 4-ness is already embedded in the pyramid. I'll show that later on at the end. Okay, another expression of 3-ness and the 4-ness would be the cube is a 4th dimensional square, so we'll call that the 4. But if I said to you, if we could dissect the cube, can we find the tetrahedron inside the cube? And you can see that if that cube was a piece of potato and we had a carving knife and we could slice some of the edges off, you'd see that embedded in the heart of the cube is the tetrahedron. Another interesting thing is what is a 4th dimensional triangle. So we start off with a line that's 2 dimensions, and the first form that can ever be created from 3 points is a triangle. But that's a shadow, that's only 2D. We're interested in what's the 3-dimensional version of the triangle. It's the pyramid or tetrahedron. So imagine now you've got 5 tetrahedrons. You're holding 1 tetrahedron, and with the other 4 tetrahedrons, can you glue the 4 other tetrahedrons on the 4 faces. So the one that you are holding becomes the middle of the core. So we end up with a multi-dimensional construct of tetrahedra. And then someone comes along and says, I'm going to shine my laser beam upon this nesting of 5 tetrahedra. And lo and behold, the shadow on the flat surface is the pentacle. And this is quite an amazing discovery, that the 3 becomes the 4, becomes the 5. But the secret is hidden in the dimensional realm. And this can be demonstrated. This is what we're going to show at Chartres, how mathematics is intimately connected with geometry. And whenever we see the pentagon or the pentacle, we know we're looking at the phi ratio, the mathematics of where, if you extend your arm out and where the elbow bends, the ratio of the short part to the long part is 8:13. So this pentacle is every time we see the 5-pointed star, we think of 5. And this was also the symbol of the ancient Pythagoreans, is they had 5 letters at the 5 angles of the pentacle. They had H-Y-G-I-A, Hygeia, or our goddess known as Hygeia relates intimately to health, because that's where the word hygiene comes from. So the Pythagoreans did a couple of years of silence and meditation and fasting to access the mysteries before they were allowed to receive this knowledge. Okay, I have another unusual expression of 3 and 4. And I started my journey 35 years ago with an obsession of something called magic square. So you can see the number 618-753-294. That comes from ancient China, Tibet. It's perhaps the oldest known mathematics on the planet. 5 years ago, and it's a harmonic, because all the sums of the rows and the columns that are up to 15. So what I've done over the decades is I've joined dots. I've joined the numbers from 1 to 2 to 3 to make exquisite patterns. So the pattern on the left is the magic square of 3 by 3, but it's been done 4 times. And we're going to do a whole day and charts just on magic squares. So basically we turn number into yantra or power diagram. So here's a 3 by 3 magic square. You can see that notice that there's 8, it's a golden star with 8 points. What happens further is that when we go to the next possible magic square, it's called a 4 by 4. A 4 by 4 magic square, you can see it in the middle of the page. The numbers 4 squared is 16, arranged so that all the rows and columns add up to 34. Now, if I joined 1 to 2 to 3 to 4, I would get a certain pattern, but I rotate this pattern a few more times, and lo and behold, what I get is a different pattern. But if you look at the center, of the image on the right, you'll see that the 3 by 3 on the left is being absorbed or naturally inherited. It's almost like a genetic inheritance. The 3 went into the heart of the 4. These are totally 2 different entities, yet the seed of one is birthed in the other one. On the next slide, here's the 4 by 4. I've enlarged it. If you look at the yellow 8-pointed star in the middle, and the other entity, the 3 by 3, inside the 4 by 4. This is kind of we call it could be an anomaly, but I see it as a mathematical gem. Some people call it a mathematical plum. It's a very beautiful expression how nature organizes itself very coherently and precisely. And there are other examples of this. I just wanted to show you that we are going to be talking about magic squares in July. Okay, so most people know that the 2 gems, one is the phi ratio, the Fibonacci sequence, but the second and equal to it is the 3-4-5 triangle. So without going into much detail, I assume most people understand, we learned this at school, that 3 squared plus 4 squared equals 5 squared. 9 plus 16, you add up all the tiles and they all fit on the other side, there's 25. So and it only happens if it's a right angle triangle. There has to be a 90-degree triangle. But when we study the 3-4-5 triangle, we also find that it's hidden inside plants. So if you look at the flower on the right-hand side, you're looking at the flowering seeds of the garlic plant. And that 3-4-5 arrangement of the seeds is part of the natural arrangement of how nature organizes its seeds and flowers. And that's taken from a book that most of us know called The Power of Limits by George Doxy. That's one of the classics, one of the books that changed my life. On an esoteric level, we can go deeper into the 3, 4, 5 triangle, and we can find it inside a prism. So if we had a rectangular prism, like a box, and looked at some of the ratios of through space, we'll see the 3, 4, 5 triangle on the left there. You can see that there's a very weird connection between some of the vertices and the points, and there's that triangle again, but it's not in the flat plane, it's in the volume. Okay, and there's another thing we can do with the 3, 4, 5 triangle, is that we can multiply all the sides by 36 or 72. And when we multiply the 3, 4, 5 triangle, we get bigger triangles. So if I multiply every side by 36, I end up with some magic numbers called 108, which is the pattern in the golden mean. The other side is 144, which has got to do with the 144,000 grid arcs per second in space when we work with satellites. 144 is the speed of light. And then the other side is 180. If we double 180 for the next slide, we get 360. So somehow the 3, 4, 5 triangle contains all the harmonics of the sphere, which has got a lot to do with our original zygote of creation when we were the one, the sphere. Okay, and another unusual fact is we look at 3, become the 4, become the 5, but it just happens that if we analysed the square area of this mystical 3, 4, 5 triangle, it happens that the square area of the 3, 4, 5 triangle happens to be 6. And I thought that was a delightful expression of the continuation of 3, 4, 5, 6, this consecutiveness, this order. And because we know that if it was a rectangle, the 2 sides are 3 and 4. So 3 times 4 is 12. So the triangle is half the rectangle. So half of 12 is 6. So, and I didn't know that. I was just doing some research and I thought, oh my God, the square area is 6. So the beauty about sacred geometry is that the more you study it, you keep realizing more and more unusual little facts. So it was a pleasure to put this all together as we keep discovering the nature of numbers. I'd like to read something from Pythagoras. Someone sent me this on my mobile phone, so it's not a very clear text, but I would like to just read a little bit about the life of Pythagoras. Legend tells us that when his parents, we're talking about the parents of Pythagoras, when the parents of Pythagoras visited the shrine of the Pythian oracle at Delphi, the god Apollo promised them an extraordinary son. And when he was born, they named him Pythagoras, which means mouthpiece of the Pythian oracle. I believe Pythian relates to the python, the snake, or the universal energies. For Pythagoras, a central fire in the universe was the prime cause of creation. It manifested everywhere and was the source of the divine spark in man. From this fire originated also all healing energy, which he termed pneuma. His concept that the universe was a living being and that physical health was closely related to psychological and spiritual being was taught at his academy at Crotona, to which he attracted an enthusiastic body of students who began each day with meditation and exercises to purify the mind and strengthen the will. They studied dance, gymnastics, diet, mathematics, and harmony, all of which was considered vital for the health of body, mind, and soul. The body itself was considered as a vehicle which, through intellect and discipline, helped the soul to advance and learn its lessons. Yeah, so the symbol for fire, as we know, is the upward triangle, and this tetrahedron or fire symbol was connected to Apollo and therefore to Pythagoras, and it's the symbol of creation to me. Pythagoras, as we know, lived around the time of Buddha, Lao Tzu, Confucius, and I often wonder if they all actually met one another. It's an interesting thought. Did Pythagoras ever meet up with Buddha? I wonder. So maybe this sacred geometry is teaching us is that we need to access the knowledge within us, say in our third eye, where we can learn how to access the records. We might want to travel to the halls of healing to get healing, but we might want to travel to the halls of knowledge where we can ask questions like, what was the true life of Jesus? What was the true life of Pythagoras? So ultimately, I feel that these are just tools for us to access the knowledge within our living library within us. Okay, we're coming to the last one now, how it relates to sixness, and we'll finish this. Another little anecdote would be, how does the six relate to this journey 2, 3, 4, 5, 6? And we can see it in the hexagon when we make a slice of DNA. So to understand the image that you're seeing, it's a flat image. If you were to visualize you are walking up a spiral staircase, and as you're walking up a spiral staircase, you decided to take a slice, which we call it a transverse slice, a horizontal slice. And if you could analyze that data, you will see there's a golden rectangle in the middle. That rectangle in the middle is in the ratio 8:13. That's the zipper in DNA. The zipper in DNA is when DNA wants to replicate itself so we can survive. It unzips itself. They're called the hydrogen bonds, but all the hydrogen bonds are in a phi ratio on the four corners of the golden rectangle. So that's the fourness. The two-ness would be, we know that DNA is two counter-rotating fields. One spiral is going one way and the other spiral is going the other way. So that's the twin helices represents two-ness. So what's the three-ness in DNA would be the codons. Most people don't know what a codon is. So let me explain what, with the number 4, there's 64 different codons. What that means is that 4 times 4 times 4, 4 cubed, is all the permutations or the possible arrangements for a codon to form. So a codon happens when 3 of the 4 genetic bases rearrange themselves. So the 4 genetic bases, as you know, A is adenine, C is cytosine, T is thymine, and G is guanine. So we have 4 bases, but a codon only happens when 3 connect. So you could have something like ADT or CAT or GTA. So there's 64 different triplets. So that's the essence of the 3, that nature only selects 3 of the 4 possible genetic materials. And the 5 would be, as you can see, from the slice of DNA, we can see that where the hexagon joins to the outside geometries, we see the pentagon. So whenever we see pentagon, we think of 5. And whenever we see hexagon, we think of 6. So I find that the molecular geometry of DNA embraces everything I know, the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. And here's an interesting arithmetical observation, which I've never seen anyone publish before. And this is quite an interesting little number fact. If I said to you, here's in this box we have, like, say 300 little wooden cubes, like cubelets, and I said to you, I want you to make like the Rubik's cube, which is a 3 by 3 by 3 cube. We know that 3 cubed is 27, and then make a 4 cube. So I want you to get 4 times 4 times 4, that's 64. So make a little stack of 64 cubes. And then I said, I want you to add to that another one, 5 cubes. So if you got 5 times 5 times 5, which is 125, you would have in front of you 3 cubed plus 4 cubed plus 5 cubed. And if I said to you, what's the summation of all these cubes? It's a big number. The sum happens to be 216. So you're going to say, well, what's so special about 216? It works out that 216 is a cubic number. It's 6 cubed. It's 6 times 6 times 6. And this might sound very simple and basic to you, but to a mathematician like me, this is an anointed piece of knowledge, because it reminds us of the symmetry of the soul, how there is order amidst the apparent chaos. Because often we go through life thinking, I don't know what my purpose is, I don't know why this is happening, but perhaps this arithmetica can remind us that indeed there is an invisible order. Even though we don't see it tangibly, but in the atomic level, in our spiritual soul, there is a reason for everything. And this 3, 4, 5 cube becomes 6 cube is an absolutely beautiful piece of information to know. So to conclude, I believe that the gift of 6 is perfected order, because only six circles can go around a central circle. So even though you're looking at the perfection of 6 around the 1, what you're really looking at, according to Buddha, is the nature of 7. The ancients, as you know, they revered 7 chakras, 7 days of the week, 7 in many, many cultures. So it's really based on the perfect packing of the 6 around the 1. But we're not interested in the flat 6 circles. What we're interested really is in the next dimension. We see that how many spheres in space pack around a central cube. And scientists call it sphere kissing or sphere packing. In fact, all sacred geometry can come back to the packing of spheres. So only 12 can pack around the 1. So even though you see 12 around the 1, it's really 13. And you can see why 13 was demonized. It's become the number of the devil, because they don't want you to remember the 12 around the 1. That's remembering who you are. So Magic Spider comes along and says, I want to join the 12 centers of these 12 spheres. And you can see that what is created is that cube octahedron. And the reason why cube octahedron is really special, and I showed you all the geometrical models at the beginning, is that if I was to measure from the very center, the center of the construct, to a vertex. So if I could hold one of the 12 internal radii with my fingers, I mean, I'm holding it here. I don't know if you can actually see it, but I'm holding one of the 12 radii of this cube octahedron, even though you're seeing the flat shape. Let's call it, it is 1 unit, but let's call it a matchstick. It just happens that the length on the outside of the cube octahedron is also a matchstick, which means the inside is the same as the outside. There is no other shape in the universe that is so perfectly balanced as this cube octahedron, which is really, its geometric signature is 6, 6, 6, 6, because it's really made up of 4 rings or 4 hexagons. If you squint your eyes and look closely, you'll see that it's purely the essence of sixness. And we can see in the next slide here that why did the masters like Leonardo da Vinci, they adored and did beautiful drawings of this 12 around the 1, this cube octahedral frequency. And I demonstrated before when I had the rubber and the sticks that when you compress the cube octahedron, it not only creates the 5 platonic solids and goes back to the tetrahedron, if you glued a bead on one of the edges, you would realize that the path of the collapse, which we call perfect compression, the key word, if you're a physicist, if you had to summarize all of physics in one word, I'd say it's compression. The ability to compress non-destructively is to follow the path of the golden mean spiral so that we can survive this compression and travel from the macro to the micro, so we can access the records and our DNA and reconstruct ourselves. Okay, so we're coming just to the last few slides. I'm just checking my time. I think I have about a few more minutes. So there's the 6 around the 1, but we can add another 6 around that internal ring of 6, and we end up with 13 circles. There's that number 13, the 12 around the 1. If you can visualize these 13 circles as 13 spheres, you suddenly have the construct for the blueprint for all creation. That simple diagram of the 6 around the 6 creates all sacred geometry that I know, all the platonic solids. And if you look closely, you're seeing the Star of David within the Star of David. So when one shape is self-similar and nests within itself, we call it fractal. So this is even though you're seeing the cube within the cube, its original geometry, its skeleton came from the 6 around the 1. So that's called Metatron's cube, the ability to turn ourselves inside out. And as Karen was talking about that beautiful parable of the snowflake, everyone's familiar with snowflake geometry because it's the way nature crystallizes and shifts from liquid to solid, it prefers 1/6 of a circle. We call it a 60-degree tilt angle. So when nature crystallizes at this favorable 60-degree angle, it forms the most exquisite hexagonal geometries. And as you know, no two snowflakes are the same. So these we call the fingerprints of God. So I'd just like to conclude that my journey with Arithmetica and sacred geometry is an investigation not to just focus on the external geometries that we've just looked at, but I believe it's to embed or nest these potent shapes and patterns and frequencies into our field, into our aura, into our consciousness and into our hearts. Thank you very much.
And I just want to really acknowledge all that you've shared, and it went very fast. I'm sure many, many people have questions, and hopefully some of them will get answered at Chartres. But we do have a few minutes for some of them to be answered here. If anyone has a question, they could raise their hand, and Dan will call on you.
Hi, Jane. Hi, Karen.
Hi, Sheila.
Jane, I am a little bit of a student of embryology, and I wanted your input on the understanding that I have that the sperm does not penetrate the egg, but that the egg opens and admits and then closes. And also, we do turn ourselves inside out in the 4th week of development, and we rotate 180 degrees to embody ourselves fully. So I just wanted to put that in there. And then I had the question about the Chartres labyrinth itself and how the, can you see this?
Yes, we can see it.
Yeah,
Yeah.
the 12-pointed star over the compass in the middle of the Chartres. What is that telling us? What does the Chartres labyrinth actually have to do with the story that you're telling?
Well, I suspect from my research that, like, we're in a base 10 system. Like, when we do Vedic mathematics, we can calculate at the speed of light based on 10, 100,000 million. But the true base to understand the mathematics of pyramids and Stonehenge and the Earth grid is really 12. But 12 times 12 is 144. It's got to do with the speed of light. So everything sacred I know is done in base 12. And the other base, did that diagram you have 12 circles and there was a central one? Because that would be the 12 around the 1. See, that's 6. Yeah, that's the 6th one. Okay. But essentially that's another interesting diagram on the true value of pi, because it's not 6 perfect circles, it's 6 and a fraction. I'm going to talk about that at Chartres, but the value for pi, which is the relationship of the circle to the square, which is heaven and earth energies, is a distortion. The value that they teach at school, 3.141 pi, which we all learn at school, is wrong. It's a fraction deficient because they're not using fractal geometry. They're not using base 12. So we're in the wrong, distorted. All the mathematics we learn at school has a slight distortion to it. It's all wrong. But when we apply the golden mean, the phi ratio, and base 12, we get another value called 3.144. And that's going to change all the Earth's frequencies. So, you know, when we put a mobile phone to our ears and there's cancer generated from the radiation, that's because the frequencies are slightly out, because the harmonics of the circle and the square is not rectified. When we start working in a base 12 system, which is what the Americans have hung on to, and thank God they're still using base 12, the knowledge of the world will come through again. And it's not that base 10 is wrong, we need it. And another thing I'm going to teach in Chartres is called base 9. There's a thing called, which Tesla talked a lot about, 369, 369. When we take away the number 9 from everything we know, if you took a number like, let's take the number 25. If you take away 9 from 25, you have 14. If you take 9 from the 14, you're left with 5. So we look at the remainders. So that number 5 could have been gotten another way by looking at the original number. What was the first number we were talking about? 25. Okay, so if we take 9 from 25, so we end up with 16. And take 9 from 16, we end up with 7. So that single digit 7 could have been arrived at by merely adding the digits of the original number 25. So if you went 2 plus 5 is 7, that would be the continued remainder from 999. So base 9 and base 12 are the keys to everything I know. Base 10 is, we'll call it earth mathematics. It's efficient. We need it. But if you want to study the mysteries like what you're showing, we need to look at everything in terms, it's like we need to put goggles on X-ray eyes and look at everything in terms of 9 and 12. And I'm going to talk a lot about that in Chartres Cathedral. So that's called digital compression, digital reduction, reducing the big numbers to single digits. And that opens up what we call base 12. That'll open up. So if you compressed or reduced all the Fibonacci numbers, you end up with an infinitely repeating 24 pattern. I'm trying to get back to the 12 there. And when I show you the repeating pattern of 24, you see it's based on 2 rows of 12. And if you add up all the numbers of the reduced infinitely repeating Fibonacci sequence of 24, it all adds up to 108, 108, 108. And then you start to ask questions. Why do 1 billion people on the planet today, as soon as they hear the number 108, like 108 beads on their rosary beads, 108 verses in the Chartres, they literally stop and put their hands together as if to say namaste, because they don't know why. It's a mindless adoration for base 12, because everything we know is hidden in base 12. But if you don't do the digital reduction of 999, you'll never see the magic of 12. And that's my total life, my whole life's research is based on the number 9 and 12. So I will talk about that, but the schools won't teach this. See, it's actually a thing called clock mathematics. It's called, in universities, they teach this as clock maths, modulus 9, but they refuse to teach it at a school level. And to me, it's the secret to the Pythagorean mysteries is the number 9 and the number 12. But we're going to do a whole day. Actually, nearly every day is going to be touching on digital compression. So, but the problem is when you talk about mathematics, people shut down. Like when you muscle test someone and you say the word mathematics, people shut down. But once you can ignite their interest and show them that it's actually the mathematics of flowers and crystals and human body and temples, they go, oh, wow, why didn't we learn this at school? So it's all very self-evident. But base 12, as you suggested, it's the key, yeah. And thank you for the information on the cosmogenesis, because I know you're a student of embryology, and I must say I'm absolutely a beginner. I'm so fascinated by cosmogenesis and the beginnings of creation. I probably only know a fraction of what you know. So it's good to know that when we cross or share information that you can validate and say, yeah, we do turn inside out. I actually didn't know that. I'm coming from number theory. I'm a number theorist, but you're an investigator into the cells of life. So I'm fascinated to have a conversation with you and know everything you know. So I'm not
let me just tell you, for those who are interested in this is out of the phenomenology approach to embryology by Jaap van der Wal. You can find his work at embryo.nl.
Beautiful.
Thank you.
I love the image you said that when the sperm doesn't penetrate the ovum, you said it just opens up. It's a gateway. Yeah. That's such a beautiful image. I didn't know that. So.
Well, you had talked about 12 points, and from your perspective, it was 12 sperm. Van der Wal says it takes many to negotiate softening the zona pellucida, and then the egg agency somehow chooses one, admits it, and then closes.
Beautiful. Love that.
So there's sovereignty there, and I was wondering what that means for you, but that's okay. I don't want to take up all the time. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And is this shareable? Can we see this on a video? Can his research?
Yes, you can go to his embryo.nl, and he's got all of this on a website, Dynamic Morphology.
Fantastic. Thank you for sharing that.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you, Sheila, and thank you, Jain. So actually, our time is up. So unfortunately, I'm going to have to draw us to a close, but it's better to end with too many questions and too much interest than not enough. So if others of you had questions, you could email them to Jain, but you could also save them for our next month. March 16th will be our next call. And I've invited Andrew to be our guest speaker, but I haven't heard back from him about it yet. So we'll keep you posted as to who will be presenting next month. And I want to wish everyone a very wonderful time now as we are needing to step forward in our work in healing and protecting and transforming what is taking place in our world. So the power of sacred number can actually help strengthen us and empower us. So I wish you all a blessed month. And I don't know if anyone has any last comments. Jim, if you want to say anything, or and
No, I think we're all good. That was a fabulous presentation, Jane. Thank you so much.
all right, good. So wishing you all the best. And Ruth, would you like to play a little something on your flute for just a moment?
Okay. Maybe I'll sing though. I'm feeling
Okay.
the
All right.
sing.
Thank you, Ruth.
Bye, everyone.
May the spirit of Chartres live with us all until we meet again. Thank you and bye-bye.
Bye.